Hi there, this is Carl Irwin, and I am back with another quick reply. This is specifically dealing with the topic of sampling. I think this is where a lot of people get caught up in the issue that we're discussing about copyright infringement in instrument libraries or synthesizers, in this case, that use samples and their use in music, and how copyright transference goes from one to the other, or if it goes at all. I want to first clarify that in the discussion it has been stated a few times that my argument, or that I don't think it's right to say it's my argument, because what I'm really discussing is what exists in law. I'm not really giving you much of a theory as a new concept. This is really, I think, what is demonstrated in written law and case law, and I'm merely showing it to you so that we can see it. But it has been stated that the transformation, we'll talk about transformation again just briefly in a moment, that the transformation of a sample from a instrument library to music nullifies, and I say that again, nullifies or removes or discontinues the copyright claim on the library. That is not the case, and that is not what I'm saying. What I am saying is, as per the law, the copyright claim on the library does not apply to the music that the library is used to make. It's not that it is nullified. It's not that it is discontinued in some way. It's not that this is some kind of loophole. What I am telling you is that by the law, and the doctrines in the law, particularly for U.S. law, and these doctrines exist in many other places, not just in the United States, and presuming that, the United States, and I don't mean this to be big-headed here or anything, but as far as copyright law, the United States is a pretty robust system. U.S. copyright law, and much other copyright law is derivative of concepts that have been placed in use in the U.S. code. And usually when you're dealing in copyright infringement, and as we're relating it to music, you're often going to be dealing in the U.S. courts. That's where you're going to be dealing with it. So I am not saying that the copyright on the library is obstructed in transformation. I'm saying that it is not intended for that transformation. That is a misapplication. That the library is intended to be used to create music. That is why it exists. And the claim of copyright applies to the library, period, as a library, or the instrument, period, as the instrument. That the use of the instrument or the library to make music is the intended purpose of the library, and that copyright of the library can't possibly apply to the music. It is not able. It doesn't have the capability to do that, and nobody who has copyright, and everybody does who creates a library, nobody that has copyright on the library to be used as a library or an instrument to be used as an instrument can possibly ever or would desire to claim copyright infringement on music. Okay, so that's what I'm saying. There's a distinct difference between the idea that the copyright is broken or is disrupted or is thrown away or something like that. My point is that the copyright simply does not apply and is not intended to apply. So here's where people get caught up, I think, sampling, this word. And you can look, Wikipedia is not an authority. Wikipedia is a bibliography. It's a collection of sources and information, and from there you can visit those sources and that information. So as a bibliography, let's just look at what we can find here about sampling. So this is sampling as it relates to music, because sampling can refer to a lot of different things. In our case, it must deal with music. And when we're talking about copyright law and court cases, we're always talking about sampling of music. Okay, so what is sampling as it relates to music and as it relates to this discussion? Well, in sound and music, sampling is the reuse of a portion or sample of sound recording in other recordings. Samples may comprise elements such as rhythm, melody, speech, sounds, or entire bars of music, and may be layered, equalized, sped up or slowed down, repitched, looped, and otherwise manipulated. They're usually integrated using hardware samplers or software such as digital audio workstations. As we've been talking about this, I've been talking about sampling with respect to sampling music and then using those samples in other pieces of music. In that way can violate the copyright of music, right? Distinctly, there is a copyright on music, and then there is a copyright on sound recordings, and that's how it is written in U.S. law and many other laws. This, however, this concept of sampling, it certainly can apply to sound recordings that are not necessarily musical. But you have to recognize that when we're talking about sampling in this respect, we're talking about the reuse of a portion. The reuse of a portion. Okay? Meaning that there is an existing work, and then something is taken from it or sampled from it and then reused. Now, relate this to instrument libraries. That is not the case in an instrument library as we are discussing it with virtual playing orchestra or anything like it. Can you have an instrument that does sampling of this sort? Yes, you can. They exist out there, right? Sound boards where they take clips from movies or whatever and then they put them on their quotes and those kinds of things. That would be an infringement of copyright for sure, because you're reusing a portion of a work that exists. But when we're talking about instrument libraries in this way, we're looking at the source samples. These are samples of instruments, not samples of work. Okay? And it does matter. It does matter where they come from, that those samples don't come from work, but that rather they come from individual sound recordings of instruments. They are samples of a sound that is recorded for the purpose and use of, and we'll talk about purpose and use again, purpose and use of an instrument. Okay, again, if someone is using a Korg synthesizer that has pre-recorded samples, there is no documentation in the license of that instrument that relinquishes copyright on the sounds. There's no reason for there to be, because it is an instrument. It is intended to be used to make music. And there's no such thing as a transference of the copyright of the sound recording of the individual sample transferring over to the copyright of the music that a musician or a composer creates using that instrument. Doesn't exist. And this is identical. It is an identical analogy to sample libraries as we're talking about them. They are one and the same. They're not like each other. They are the same thing. Okay? So that's what we're talking about. What people are confusing is this other concept here, which is related to a sample library, instrument library, a process similar to sampling originated in the 1940s with musique concrète. And this is, about musique concrète. It has influenced a lot of pop people, Frank Zappa, even the Beatles did some of it. You can read about that on there. I learned a great deal about this in music school. Pierre Boulez is where I think of musique concrète and sampling in this way, where you're making original recordings of sounds by instrument or in nature, and then looping them or splicing them and creating music from that. That is exactly what an instrument library is. Instrument library is really this. It's just that it isn't concrete sounds that come from nature, right? But rather they are sounds that are created on an instrument and then organized into a library. And then they are spliced and looped and whatever via the play engine, be it a keyboard like a Korg, or be it a software engine like, something that East West would put out, their play engine or Spitfire, whatever, okay? Or an SFZ player or an SF2 player, or whatever the case may be in your instance. Okay, this is the type of sample that we're talking about. It's this right here, and you can see they talk about that Fairlight, right? The EMU emulator, all these other ones. This is the realm that we're dealing in. We're not dealing in this realm. This is where court cases and litigation is at. We're dealing in this realm where there is no court case or litigation apart from a case where a person takes samples from a library and repackages them into another library. This is where legality is of concern. Okay, don't confuse the two because they're different. Even though by plain definition of sound recording, they're both samples, they're not the same thing with respect to intent or source. The sources are different, the intent is different. Okay? Now, sampling is a foundation of hip-hop music. This is where the court cases come in. Okay? So there's a lot of court cases about taking a work, a piece of a work, taking away a piece or a sample of that work and then reusing it in a new work. Obviously, sampling without permission can infringe on copyright. Okay? But here's where it applies to samples as we're talking about it in a instrument library, or may be fair use. Now, what I'm telling you is that in every case where you're using an instrument library to create music, this is always categorized as fair use. It has to be fair use. There's really no way it can't be fair use. And the reason why it fits into fair use has to do with the doctrine itself. So if we quickly look at fair use doctrine in U.S. Code, which I pointed to, U.S. Section 107, and I have videos on this already, but I'll just talk about it again. The issues that they look at in fair use is 1, the purpose and character of the use, including whether such use is commercial nature or for nonprofit, whatever. Purpose and character can relate to what is its intention, right? 2, the nature of the copyrighted work. 3, the amount and substantiality of the portion used. This is where people try to make arguments in court when they're talking about sampling in hip-hop music. They say, well, I only used a little bit of it, right, in my composition. And because it's only a little bit, that means it's okay. This is not related to using an instrument library, though. The instrument library really falls entirely on this, right, in a subsection on that, which we'll get to in a second. 4, the effect of the use upon the potential market for or value of the copyrighted work. Using an instrument library also applies here. Okay, so number 4, which is the effect of meaning that if I use an instrument library that is created with the intended purpose of being used as an instrument, and I make music from that, that has no effect in the potential market on that library. 0. It cannot possibly, because my music is not a library. I can't write a piece of music unless my music is sampling in the original sense, stealing, right, taking away each of the tones of my library or some tones of the library and differentiates them one tone, then the next tone, then the next tone, then the next tone, and that is my music, and I put it out really for the purpose and use of sampling and create as a library, then I'm there. That's insane, right? That's really goofy. We're talking about creating music. We're talking about using the instrument to make music. And my music cannot be a library. It just doesn't exist in that way. That's the transformative issue. So let's look down here. 1, purpose and character of use. You can read through this here as a summary of the law. But when you get down to transformative concepts, if I just do a quick search in here, transformative. So down here, a key consideration in later fair use cases is the extent to which the use is transformative. This is how purpose and character is applied in the case of a library, an instrument library, or a Korg synthesizer which is commercial and has sound samples on it, okay, yet doesn't have anything in there relinquishing copyright. If you really believe this, guys, what I'm telling you, listen, those of you ladies and gentlemen and all types between, Those of you out there who really subscribe to this idea, I'm telling you, you should not use any commercial products. Do not use synthesizers. Do not use commercial products. Do not use any kind of presets. Don't use any of that because there's no language out there relinquishing copyright for you. It doesn't exist. You can't find it. What I'm telling you is that if you're afraid that you're going to be sued by someone that has a CC license, with attribution, you ought to be afraid to use your synthesizer because there's no language out there. There is no license out there that relinquishes copyright. Doesn't exist. Right? The copyright on those synthesizers is as synthesizers. It's insane to really think the way I think some people are about this. Okay, so when you look at the court cases, you're always going to find that the court cases are in respect to taking a piece of a work and using it in a new work. In the case of an instrument library, it is entirely transformative. Right? The thing that you're making has no reflection on the original thing. It's absolutely transformative. Right. This is now. Here's where I come down. Show me a case, guys. Show me a case. Show me an example where someone used an instrument, a synthesizer, an instrument library that is intended to be used to create music. Show me a case where someone was sued for copyright infringement for using that instrument. I'm waiting. Now, you're going to show me all kinds of cases where someone sampled a work and used that sample and made an instrument. Oh, yes, I'm aware. Oh, yes, I'm aware that there's those cases, but we're not talking about that. That is not what we're talking about. Okay. So, remember, CC cannot create new rights. CC is under the umbrella of copyright law. Whatever exists in copyright law is the only rights that exists. You cannot ask for attribution outside of copyright law. If you want to ask for attribution outside of copyright law, you have to spell that out just like the Drum Gizmo people did. And even then, what they're saying is we're not asking for attribution for the library as a library for the sake of the library. They're asking for attribution because if you're attributing performers on your recording, you're saying, well, this recording was made and key players on this was the drummer over here, the flute player over there, the guitarist over here, the keyboard player over here. Oh, and by the way, some of the loops that we created in this or some of the sounds we created, we use this Drum Gizmo kit. They're saying if you're going to credit these other people, you have to credit us too. And that is not part of the CC license. That is their own language. CC doesn't give you that. CC with attribution only falls under the copyright law, and this is what the copyright law gives you. Okay, so anyway, that's it. So samples, the way it applies to copyright law, particularly the U.S. laws, and the other laws have very similar language, right? What you need to do is, if you're really worried about this, and listen, you're paranoid, you're crazy, you're nuts. Take it easy, take a deep breath. Okay, there's a lot of great libraries out there, like VPO, they're legal, guys. Like, you can use these things. That's where I've come down. I think it's pretty well defined here, and I think that if you differentiate what the meanings of terms are, in order to conclude that it's illegal to use VPO to make music without making some kind of additive attribution, I mean, what are you going to do? Record a song and then at the end put dialogue that attributes the instrument? I mean, where does that exist? When has anybody ever done that with a commercial product? That, again, doesn't have language that releases copyright. When has anybody ever done that? That's crazy, right? There's no expectation for that. If you're worried about that, I think it's because of this confusion. It's because of the confusion on this word, and where have you seen this word used in litigation. Look at the litigation and look at what's going on and understand that that is entirely different, entirely in every way that you can think, from using a synthesizer, a sampler, or a sound library as an instrument. Okay. Anyway, there you go. I don't know how long this video is, but I'm trying to dig deeper and address questions directly so that we can come to an understanding here. Some of you still won't be satisfied by what I'm saying. You think that this is all really muddy. It's not muddy. It really isn't. You know, when someone makes an instrument to be used as an instrument, you use it as an instrument. It's just electronic. It's electronic, that's all. It's electronic and it uses pre-recorded sounds, but it's an instrument. It's not a piece of music. And it's made to be used in that way. Who in the world would ever make an instrument that they won't let anybody play? You know, that's really what you're suggesting in the hesitation to use something like VPO. Okay, now don't go making another library from VPO samples without using the appropriate attribution. That is in the law. That's what the law is for. Okay. Anyway, good luck with that. Happy mixing.